Greetings, my name is Ann Schmidt. I'm the lead curator here at the Peoria Riverfront Museum. Today we join John Heintzman, one of the many people in the Peoria arts community whose lives were touched by Dr. George and Norma Kottemann, as he shares his insights into their remarkable collection of art. George and Norma Kottemann were exceptional supporters of the Peoria arts community. As collectors, they were enthusiastic, informed, and generous. They educated themselves and others about the current art scene. They got to know the artists whose art they collected, and they shared their passion and their collection with the Peoria community. This spring, thanks to the generosity of their family, Dr. George and Norma Kottemann's collection is shared once again with Peoria. The Peoria Riverfront Museum, together with the Peoria Art Guild, wish to thank Kathy Kottemann-Wire, Carl Kottemann, and their children for allowing us to host the George and Norma Kottemann collection, a 40-year passion for art.
This is the Kottemann collection, and what we are seeing today is about 45 pieces that are remaining of their collection. They had a large collection of outdoor sculptures, majority of which have gone to Central Florida. They had a wonderful agreement with the former chair of the art department at Bradley University, Rob Reedy, and they gifted all of their collection to Central Florida and the art center there. And they have an agreement that they will be showing all the art outside, the outdoor art, and then the indoor pieces will be part of a revolving gallery exhibit. For those of you who don't know Dr. and Mrs. Kottemann, they are native Peorians. Dr. Kottemann got its orthodontics degree through the University of Illinois at Chicago. They tended to remain very loyal to University of Illinois and Illinois artists in particular. When they moved from Forest Hill to Bigelow Avenue, they had a local architect, Les Kenyon, design their house. It's a mid-century modern house, and they built it at 3300 Bigelow Street. And their next door neighbor was a woman named Adelaide Cooley, and she was the one that really introduced them to collecting art. The very first commission that they ever had, that they made, was to Nita Sunderland, and we have a piece in the gallery across there of Nita's piece. She was a professor of sculpture at Bradley University, and she did the door handles. She designed and sculpted the door handles for their home. They did remain with the home, just for those of you who want to know, because I know that people do. The Kottemanns were very, very gracious, generous people. Not only with the arts, but with everything that they did. They were very, very interested in educating people about art and about enriching our community. They established a scholarship fund at Bradley University. They had proposed and they developed, when we built Hoyser Art Center, they outfitted and completed the sculpture department's area, the studio there. When we moved the Peoria Art Guild, which Dr. Kottemann was very, very involved with, downtown to Harrison, he again furnished the ceramic studio. But instead of calling it the Kottemann Studio, in the gracious and just endearing way that they are, they called it the Adelaide Cooley Ceramic Studio. So my point is that they gave and they gave and they gave. They were one of the first ones to really give to the city of Peoria. We have a George Rickey out at the International Airport. That was the first sculpture that they placed in the public arena. The last one happens to be right down the street here on Washington Street in the roundabout, Bruce White piece called Portal, which Dr. Kottemann did see through its dedication, and then he passed away soon thereafter. One of the things that they always considered themselves was they considered themselves conservative abstract art collectors. And when we talk about conservative, we talk about pieces that are a little more contemplative than they are reactionary, shall we say. They have a few pieces by our abstract expressionist artists, but for the most part, they're minimal abstract artists. They also began by collecting large outdoor pieces, which they had in their backyard. When they would get a new piece, they would often invite the artist to their home. They were very involved at Bradley University in placing a number of sculptures there. Linda Howard and Jerry Peart are two of the pieces. And immediately, Dr. Kottemann would say, oh, come visit us at our house and we'll have a party for you. And that was just how they were with everybody. They opened up their doors to their home for so many people. We're going to start with glass for right now, and we're going to start here with this piece of glass, which was one of Dr. Kottemann's very favorite. It's by Christopher Reese. And actually, they were introduced to glass as an art collection object by the Kolbs. And the Kolbs were chemists at Bradley University and had started collecting glass, and they introduced the Kottemanns to glass. The first glass pieces that they collected were the hot glass, or art glass, studio glass. This piece is by Christopher Reese, and I think one of the reasons that Dr. Kottemann in particular really loved this piece was the fact that it is optical glass, and it is cut much like you would cut a diamond, a gem stone. This piece was always his favorite, and I have to say, Jeff and I'd go over to his house and he'd say, don't you just love it? And I'd always say, yeah, it's nice. It is nice. But at the same time, I wasn't quite as overwhelmed by it as he was. The remarkable thing is that he was the only one allowed to dust this. And one day he was aggressively dusting it and he broke off the point to it. So in Dr. Kottemann fashion, though, of course, he immediately contacted the artist and said, what are we going to do? Not necessarily telling on himself, but that there had been some damage done to it. Packed it up, sent it to them, and they would, and Christopher Reese repolished it and recut the point, and it's perfect. As you look at it, you'll see that the most amazing thing is that Corey Tibbetts, who's the exhibit's curator and does the installation here, he makes this just become such an incredible piece of glass. Through the lighting, he gives you all these different things. And as you walk around it, you can see that there's a number of different facets that are just unbelievable. We kind of consider this side, I look at it and I feel like I'm standing at the Brooklyn Bridge because the spanse is just incredible and the reflections that he gets for it. I think Dr. Kottemann first got interested in Chris Reese's parts because his glass was optical glass. They had mostly hot glass. And as I said, we'll see Harvey Littleton and Labino's work and some of the others in just a minute. One of the wonderful things that Ann Schmidt did here at the museum is she did put together a little video here with little snippets of 5 different artists working in glass. And the wonderful thing is that really explains how the magic of glass happens and how they can create wonderful large images, such as this large piece by Powell. If any of you have any questions, please interrupt me. Yes, ma'am.
Is the cutting done on the inside? Like, is it? Where is the cutting done, other than the shape? But
it's like a jeweler, and I think they just start cutting facets, and they start from the outside and work in. And I think the amazing thing about this is, and Christopher Reese, his large pieces, he can start with a 4,000-pound piece of optical glass and carve it down. It's sort of a lot like Nita with her marble. She can start with a much larger piece of marble and then start carving it. And it's cutting it, and I don't know exactly how, it fractures somewhat like a diamond does. And so by doing that, he's going to get the reflections and he's going to create these wonderful patterns in it.
But if I felt this on the outside, I would
it would be smooth.
It's
smooth.
So
and you could repeat this, that every other faucet there near the point is frosted, and it helps to give it that interesting.
So yes, part of it, the question was, is it smooth? And it is frosted, so that part of it is going to reflect, and that gives more depth, I think, to the glass itself. I don't know how this would rank on a diamond chart, if it'd be a severe clear or whatever it is. Stephen Powell's work is really quite remarkable because he works so large. And when we think about glass, we think about them blowing hot glass and they start to make a thing. This would become a very large bulbous sort of object. He would flatten it by putting it back in the furnace, heating it up, and then patting it with a paddle to make almost like a buttocks. If you were doing baskets, it'd be a buttocks type of basket. the thing that's so unique about Powell's work is that he cuts the disc. To add color, they use these rods, and they're just like straws, but they're pure color and glass. And they use it by putting them back into the furnace and reheating it and everything. Instead of using the straws, he cuts them and uses sections of them in disc-like form. And I think in this case, he creates almost a pattern of like a peacock. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Again, this was a piece that was featured in the Journal Star. It was in their house. It was always a pretty piece, and I think it was more understated because of its size. But when Corey puts it in this situation and lights it the way he does, it just is so beautiful. It really is. And newspaper photos never do anything justice, any justice at all. One of the things that's, I think, most important about the Kottemann collection is that it's literally a visual history of 20th century art. We can start here with the Henry Moore piece. And Henry Moore, if you were to ask a Brit, anyone from England, who the greatest artist is in the world, it would never have been Picasso. It would always be Henry Moore, Henry Moore. And he is probably one of the most significant sculptors in history, in 20th century art history. He takes the human form and he tries to give it some depth and a dimension that's both psychological as well as physical. Here we have a very obviously like almost breast-like forms that are coming together. The one thing that always he includes in his works, and we can really see it here in this lithograph that they have, is that there's a void and that there's always this exit or entrance into the soul, so to speak, of the work. Now, I taught at Bradley for quite a while, and one of the people that I taught with and who I absolutely admire, and as did the Kottemanns, is Nita Sunderland's piece. And the white piece of marble that's over there is by Nita. Now, back in the 80s, I didn't mention Henry Moore because she said she didn't even look at Henry Moore. About a year and a half, almost maybe even a little longer than that, we had an exhibit of hers here at the Riverfront Museum, and she did acknowledge the fact that she does look at Henry Moore's work. I mean, there's a pretty obvious interpretation of the subject matter in the same way, in the same manner. And I say that because it's not necessarily that Nita is copying Henry Moore's work. Instead, they find inspiration in the same way. And I think that's important because we're going to see a lot of artists there's many things that inspire them. Some are historic, some are mathematical or scientific. Glass is chemical, to be honest. If you can understand the chemistry to making art in glass, then you can make successful pieces. We're going to look at this piece here, and this is a piece by Richard Hunt. And Richard is one of the most significant African-American artists in Illinois. If you look out at the sculpture garden here, the southeast corner of the campus has a Richard Hunt. It's part of a program that the Illinois Arts Council had when the Illinois Arts Council had money. It was called Partners in Purchase. And like I would raise half the money and then they would give me half the money to purchase Illinois artists, and we did that. And Dr. Kottemann had this, we had that piece there. One time, he and I were both on the board at the Peoria Art Guild, and I can't remember the specifics, but for some reason, one of our exhibits fell through. And so we had a 6-week gap, and it's like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? Dr. Kottemann fashion? We'll just call up Richard and see if you can't go up there and pick up a few sculptures. So we did, and he said, John's going to be up there and he'll have a truck, and can we borrow a few sculptures? And so I ended up with like 11 very large sculptures in the back of the U-Haul and everything, and then he also had a few prints that we could pick up, and there was another African-American artist, Martin Peoria, that I was aware of, and I got a couple of prints of his, and we had an instant exhibition, and it was a successful exhibition. And two of the things that make it so important is that was Dr. Kottemann's personality. I think the only regret that he really had was that when he approached Oprah, she didn't give us money, and he couldn't understand why the Peoria Art Guild needed the money and she should give us the money. But the same goes with Richard. If an artist has their work and we need it, we're going to get it. And he just is forthright like that. He'd just go actually do it. This was in the bathroom at one time too. I think that the reason I say that is because all of their artwork here, they lived with. Everything they bought. When you're collecting art, I think the most important thing is that you have to understand that there are certain aspects that make a collection great. One is you have to buy things that you really do love. You can't buy them as an investment. There has to be some kind of reaction to you and that makes you adopt that piece of art. The other thing is you have to be very patient. We always tease, especially there's the orange piece across the gallery here is by Ellsworth Kelly. And it's red-orange panel. It happens to be a favorite of mine. But anyhow, obviously, if you lived with that and after a week you thought, I do not like orange, you know, what am I going to do? Well, the Kottemans were never like that. They were the perfect collectors. They would take time to see, okay, how is it going to hold up financially and emotionally? In a year, am I going to still be excited to see it? Is it going to bring me the same joy? But also financially, is it just a hot, you know, oh, this is a hot artist right now and they're going to pit her out and not be very important anymore. And so they did a lot of the research. They also they would buy books. They would have all these things at their hands so that they could make a really concerted effort to buy something that they knew was important and would complement what else they had. Dr. Kottemann also was able to do something that I could never do on a curator's salary, and that was to afford a subscription to the Christie's and the Sotheby's catalogs. It was just a joy, because he would after he would get done with them, he would bring them in a Ben Schwartz brown grocery bag. He'd bring me a bunch of them to Bradley, and he'd give them to me, and I'd start looking through them, and then all of a sudden I'd notice, oh, a page is missing. And so I'd go into the index and I'd say, oh, this must be where Nevelson was, because they would rip that out for his files so that he'd have more and more information on different artists. This is another piece that really is a wonderful piece. It's by Louise Nevelson. One of the things that the Kottemans did do, and I don't know that it was intentional or not, but I think that by first having met Nita Sunderland, Nita was a wonderfully strong woman. She was strong in her work, she was strong in character, she was a terrific educator. And I think that was something that the Kottemans really admired about her. It wasn't just the piece of art that they bought, but it was about her character too. Louise Nevelson was very, very similar to that. She's a Russian immigrant to the United States, and she settled in New York City. She would literally go through the alleys and the streets of New York and collecting other people's junk, their discarded pieces, a broken chair or things like that, croquet balls. She actually happened to come to the University of Iowa. My brother and I were there, and we got to meet her, and we actually have a small piece of hers that's really wonderful, and it has a croquet ball in it. But anyhow, she would take these and she'd start to group them together, and her studio and her home were one and the same. So she would take these and she would start to build boxes and fill them with these forms, and she really wanted people just to look at form. And so she'd also started to do things monochromatically, or she'd paint them all black or all white or all gold, and that was it. That's just how it is. And she'd start stacking them. And when she stacked them, when they really literally reached the ceiling, she would say, oh, that's Dawn's wedding feast. And that was the end of it. And so she'd move on to another one. Well, in the 1970s, a lot of us as artists really became interested in learning more about paper. And it was kind of a snobbery part of being an artist. It's like, I'm not going to buy commercially made paper. I will make my own paper. And so this is actually cast paper. And what she does is she makes a mold, and then she puts a paper pulp in it, applies pressure, puts a plate, a piece of wood probably on top of it, and presses it. That's how we get the decal edge, or this uneven edge. And that's part of a handmade piece of paper. In this piece here, you can still see the compartmentalized design that she had used in her three-dimensional sculptures. Here we have they're more organic and biomorphic shapes as opposed to some geometric shapes. But you look at this, and then you look at another piece that the Kottemans have by Jean Arp. Jean Arp and Louise Nevelson were contemporaries, and they knew of each other's work. Both of them sort of did the same thing, if you look at the images. This, though, in Jean Arp's case, is really remarkable because he kind of wanted to things to happen naturally. And he was more like, well, perchance you're going to make a design. And he would be the type that would lay back on a hillside, look up at the sky, and see clouds floating. And he would just say, okay, this is my design. I'm taking this one, this one, this one, this one, just like he did here, make the shape and place it on a plane. This piece is really quite wonderful because it really does scream art. I mean, it's just what it's all about. If you return to the sculpture garden here at the museum, you'll see that right next to the, what's his name? Richard Hunt. You're going to see there's a large marble base and basin, like it's affectionately known as the bird bath, but it is by Antoine Poncet. And Antoine Poncet was Arp's only student that he ever had. And when we received the Poncet, we had it in front of Lakeview Museum in this grassy knoll area, and we had actually, I had a cement platform base that was poured for when we had the Thinker, and so we placed it there. And one time Dr. Kottemann was walking in, and I was meeting him at the front lobby, and there we have nothing but glass across the front. And I noticed one of the school tours was there. They were eating lunch out on the grass, which was terrific. Then I noticed they all started to climb into the basin. I thought, that's fine. That's what public art's all about. It's accessible and everything. Oh, they started rocking in it and started rocking in it. And Dr. Kottemann and I looked at each other, and it's like, this is an accident waiting to happen. We are not going to have, this is not going to be on our conscience. So we actually met with Nita Sunderland, and I said, Nita, we have to do something to stabilize it, but we can't, obviously, the integrity of the piece is what's most important. We can't change that at all. And she designed these two little feet that slipped in there. They're cast steel pieces, and she showed me what it was and everything. I said, that's terrific. And Dr. Kottemann said, well, I knew she'd do the right thing, you know. So we went to into the interim director's office, who will remain anonymous, but we shall not mention his name. But so we sat down and we said, this is what happened. This is what we think we need to do. And Nita has this design. And we explained it to her, and she showed him exactly. And she said, you know, and I think it was going to be like $1,200 or $1,500 for the two pieces to be cast. And Dr. Kottemann, of course, I'll pay for that. That doesn't matter. It's about the safety of other people. And so we did that. And this interim director said, well, I will get a second opinion. And Nita stood up and was like, there is no need, and turned around and walked out of the office. And Dr. Kottemann and I sat there for the next 20 minutes trying to convince him why there was no need for a second opinion. If Nita said, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do. Of course, he changed his mind and he agreed to it, and we now have it, and it's exactly the way Nita, when we moved it here, it's exactly the same way. Another piece that I think the Kottemanns really liked, and it's because the artist has done something that really makes us participate in his artwork, and this is the Agam piece here. And what he always tries to do, if you're ever in Chicago at Randolph and Michigan, there's a sculpture of his, it's on the corner. And as you look at it, if you're far enough away from it, you're going to see that there's a wonderful abstracted design there. But if you get to if you walk past it and you move past it and you come all the way to this side, you're going to see there's nothing but a rainbow effect, shades of different light colors. And then if you go to the other side, you're going to see that there are little black rectangles and white for the most part. It's all about that engagement. And I think the Kottemanns really did admire that, because with their art, they wanted people to be able to come up to see it. They opened up their houses often, so many times, to different groups as fundraisers or just to entertain an artist or a group of people. Yes, ma'am.
What was the mold made out of?
The mold was probably plaster, for the most part, that she could carve pretty easily. And this piece, and this is another interesting thing, Dr. Kottemann did not have posters in his dental office, his orthodontics. Instead, he had artwork. And Dr. Kottemann was also one of the first people to take Medicaid for orthodontics. And my brother was a caseworker for, affectionately we said for the Pope, but for Catholic Charities for 20-some years. And Dr. Kottemann was the one that would give kids that are on Medicaid or braces. So anyhow, in his office, they had the Louise Nevelson. He had a couple of Calders. I mean, they were real works of art. So instead of discussing, you know, that silly tooth with a toothbrush and talking about smiling, and I think the only thing, Kathy and I were teasing, that the only thing that he did have up there was how bad chewing tobacco was for your teeth. And that was never ever admit that you chewed tobacco to Dr. Kottemann at all. As we go around here, we have another couple of glass pieces. I think Joel Philip Myers is from Illinois State University. As we come around here, we're going to go to another case that has a couple of other University of Illinois and Illinois State professors who were artists, and the Kottemans constantly were supporting artists like that. They would buy pieces, they would get them involved. If we were doing an exhibit at the Art Guild or at Lakeview Museum at the time, he would call people up and say, do you have a piece? I think you need to be in there. If there was ever a sculpture competition around, he wanted them to be aware of it and wanted them to submit work, because he was so proud of education in Illinois, and especially the University of Illinois system. But it really, it says a lot about him, because he was very devoted to that. He was also devoted to Nita. She's still alive today. She's 90 years old this year. But they supported her from the very first, from doing the door handles to their house to the piece that we have here. They have done nothing but support her, and it's because they admire her, and I think that they see that strength in an artist. And Joel Myers, Philip Myers, is another example. His work with color and work with different textures within the glass are just incredible, and his forms are non-traditional, and that's what really makes his work special. It's also amazing that in Illinois itself, we have Southern Illinois, we have ISU, and we have U of I, and they all have outstanding glass programs. And Dr. Kottemann, anytime that we did, the first time we brought Dale Shahuli here, there's a mobile glass unit from Southern Illinois. Brought it up here. Anne has been great enough to install in the hallway there several pieces of glass that have been donated to the museum as a result. But Dr. Kottemann, and some of these pieces are going to remain here at the museum. One of the pieces that I think is really important is the fact that this is a Willem de Kooning piece. And Willem de Kooning was more known as an abstract expressionist painter. He was the one that he would take and put his brush down, and he would pull it across the canvas, and then he'd take a scraper and he'd scrape it off. And his really first abstracted work were these female figures where he decimated the figure. The only thing you could see is that one was Marilyn Monroe with her smile, and the only thing was he'd cut out the smile out of like Life magazine or something and glued it onto the painting. This is an untitled piece, but it's always referred to as standing figure. And this is a wonderful piece that he made. The model, the maquette, this is a maquette, which is a small model of a sculpture. This was realized in larger forms, probably about 12 by 14 feet or so. One is in Boston, one is in Paris, and one is in Rotterdam. De Kooning was really interesting, and a lot of these artists you'll see, they don't just do one medium. They wanted to explore, and he found that with clay, he didn't need to do a drawing or anything. He could use it just like he did paint. He could meld it, he could pull it, he could push it, just like he could paint with a brush or a scraper on a canvas. And so he created this piece, and it's cast in pewter. The actual ones are actually cast in bronze. So we're going to go to this. Well, let's start here with two wonderful women, strong women artists. We have Barbara Helpworth, who's a British artist, and then we have Linda Howard. Dr. Kottemann was instrumental in getting Linda Howard on Bradley University's campus, and if you ever go over there, right in front of the library is her centerpiece, and it's it's reflected in the glass there, and it's using these rods, and it's almost a spray-like form. While she was here installing the piece, the Kottemans, of course, had her over numerous times. They did buy this piece too. This is what is it called? Sky Fence? Sky Fence. Sky Fence. This is a piece that was realized as a large sculpture. It's up in Milwaukee in the sculpture garden by the lake. And it's just a wonderful piece that they had. I believe this is going down to Central Florida. Rob Reedy was the chairman of the art department at Bradley. And he really did a lot to kind of bring a little more recognition to the art department there. He developed the Friends of Art, which the Kottemans were the initial participants in, and did a lot more with bringing an artist to speak and things like that. Dr. Kottemann, we had John Chamberlin there one time, and John Chamberlin takes crushed cars and welds them together and makes these monumental sculptures, and he's really quite a character. But he also was a rather rude man. He did a lot of smoking and used language that was just kind of obscene, to be honest. And one time when we had brought him there because he was doing some prints at Cradle Oak Press, Dr. Kottemann had arranged to have him come and lecture to the sculpture students. But one of the a more prominent family here in Peoria, one of their daughter-in-laws was in school at that time, and he's just like, there's no way. I'm not going to let him speak to these people like this, because he was just very, I mean, he just didn't, he kind of was very dismissive, and he thought, this is not what, if I'm bringing you here, you're not going to be dismissive. So he ended up not lecturing at all. But the one thing Dr. Kottemann did get out of it, he didn't buy a sculpture of his, but he took one of his Camel cigarette packages and crushed it, and so the Kottemans had it up on a shelf for the longest part. This was their John Chamberlin, was this crushed Camel cigarette container. I know, he didn't, you know. This is a really significant case that we have here. We have Harry Breen and we have Bill Carlson, both artists from the University of Illinois. Harry taught ceramics and Bill Carlson taught glass. This is a traditional form. It's a perfume vase, and the stopper is that little cylinder there. Harry Breen, I took a group of 8th graders for their 8th grade trip to the Brookfield Zoo, and we saw an actual warthog. I can say that the warthog itself was uglier, but this beauty has been, the artist took a little bit of liberty with making it as fun as it can be, I think. And people really, they just love this piece. The piece in the back there, the small watercolor, is probably the most significant piece of artwork that we've had in Peoria since the Rodin exhibit. It's a wonderful watercolor by George O'Keeffe. And George O'Keeffe was, this was done in 1917, so it's 100 years old. And George O'Keeffe at the time, this is a woman who was born in Wisconsin. She went to school at the School of the Art Institute. She settled in New York. And then she got a job to make some money down in Texas. So she goes down to Texas and she sees landscape that she's never seen before. It's like, this is just different, you know? So she takes her watercolors and she does a large series of small watercolors and some charcoal drawings. And she rolls them up, and her best friend, Anita Politzer, is in New York. And so she sends them to Anita and says, this is what I'm doing. And Anita opens it and she's like, oh, I've never seen this before. I've never seen anybody do this before. And so she rolled them back up, and there was one modern, quote unquote, now you have to remember this is 1917, so modern art in 1917 was Cézanne. So she takes these watercolors and these charcoal drawings to the American Place, and there is a gentleman there by the name of Alfred Stieglitz. He owns the gallery. And he unrolls these, and the story is that he said, at last a woman who can paint. And I think the most remarkable thing is that this was when she was 20-some years old. For the next 70 years, she lived to be 98 years old. Georgia O'Keeffe remained true to abstraction and to making her abstractions from nature. We all know she's most famous for taking the flowers and making them very sexual and very large, even though she denies that it was that way. Everyone else interprets it differently. But this is a piece that is really, really significant because this really determined what people thought of as American art. American art in the very early, we have Remington, and there's a wonderful Remington sculpture here. Remington, everybody in Europe in particular, and even like the Soviet Union, Russia at the time, but they all thought American art is cowboys and Indians. You know, it should be the wild, wild west sort of thing. And it's people like George O'Keeffe, who established what American art was. We looked at things differently. Picasso and Braque, who we'll look at later, they did devise Cubism and made us really look at paintings, two-dimensional work, very differently. But they started to develop styles that really she remained true to till she died when, like I said, when she was 98 years old. When the Kottemans heard that this was available, they determined that, okay, we're going to do our research. We're going to do our due diligence. So they called up the museum, the O'Keeffe Museum, and said, okay, is this important? They said, yes, it is significant, you know, and this and that. And so they thought, okay, we're going to purchase it, we believe. But the museum said, but you need to understand, there's some responsibility with owning a piece of artwork such as this. First of all, as a watercolor, it's nothing more than pigment that's suspended in water. And 100 years ago, she laid her brush to the paper, which is a cotton fiber paper, and it's absorbed immediately, but it's not very stable. And things like light in particular can really fade the color and damage the work. So Corey, once again, has really done a magnificent job. There are actually filters on the lights so that it takes out the UV damage that could occur. It's also, you can't really tell, but it's just slightly tilted so that the light is never directly on it. Now, when the Kottemans had this, they had this in their dining room area. And the dining room was an interior room. It didn't have any outside windows or no light was getting in. And so when they were not entertaining, they literally had a piece of black velvet that they hung over it to really protect it. I was just talking to Carl last week, and I guess they have decided, the lady that represents me in my art is from Chicago, and she serves on the acquisitions committee at the Art Institute. And I was talking to her and said, you know, this is such a significant piece, and I said, I don't know what they should do with it. And she said, well, what I would recommend is I think you need to get back in touch with the O'Keeffe Museum and see what they think is important. You can put it on an extended loan, or they could find the means to purchase it or whatever. But don't give it necessarily to the Art Institute, because the Art Institute, even like the Peoria Riverfront Museum, we have so many objects in our collection. We couldn't possibly be showing this. And I will tell you, the Kottemans, the idea is that they want to educate. They want to give back as much as they get from the piece. And so when Jeff and I and Ann and Corey, when we were collecting and pooling our thoughts about what would make an outstanding exhibit, I said, oh, this would be wonderful if Kathy and Carl would allow us to do this. And they did. And I think that is probably the greatest gift that they gave to this exhibit, is the fact that they have allowed us for this last 2 months, 3 months to exhibit this piece. Carl was just saying, though, that the museum is going to recollect, isn't that how he pronounced it? Recollect the piece. So somehow it's going to go back into the O'Keeffe collection, and it'll remain there, where their museum, if you've ever been, is just about George O'Keeffe. It's all about O'Keeffe. It's got some other artists, but they were all comrades of hers in some way or shape or form. She had a connection to them. So anyhow, this is probably, like I said, the most seminal piece of artwork that we've had in a long, long time here at the museum. And it's really been quite fun. And a lot of times people will look at it and say, but it's just such a small piece. But the idea is, it's a small idea that defined especially George O'Keeffe and female American art in general. This is a wonderful piece that they have by Marc Chagall. Again, another milestone artist in the 20th century art history. Here we have just a simple little bouquet of flowers, and we have his little cast of characters, the figures that he has. These are not quite so topsy-turvy. A lot of times his people will be upside down and they'll be doing all these fun things. This is a piece that they really did love. It's a pretty significant piece. It's a print, so it's worth some money. If you look across the gallery, you're going to see that there's another watercolor with a vase of flowers in it. That's by Harold Gregor. And actually I just typed Marlene Gregor note, his wife, a note that said, oh, I don't know if you knew, but it was in the Kottemann collection. But I had curated, we'd initially curated an exhibit of Harold Gregor's in 1986 and had here at Lakeview Museum. And it was really a significant show. He hadn't had one for quite a few years, and so we thought, I'm going to do a small show of his at the Peoria Art Guild. So we did another show of his at the Art Guild. Dr. and Mrs. Kottemann, George and Norma, of course. Oh, after the opening, bring the Gregors over. We'll have a little party for them. Bring the board of directors and all that stuff. So they had this wonderful party. And Harold gave them that in appreciation for having this little party because they were just so generous. Anyhow, Harold Gregor's large pieces go for $40,000 to $80,000. They're wonderful photorealistic Illinois landscape. His biggest market is New York City, where they don't really believe this is how people live still today. And in Illinois, there are cornfields, but anyhow, they're very large. That in itself is a very atypical piece of work. That would not be worth thousands of dollars. But in the same sense, it was part of their collection. Everything in their collection meant something to them. And they had a certain love for that object for one reason or another. One of the pieces that is really, I don't know what caused them or why they purchased this piece, but it's by Robert Motherwell, another abstract expressionist of the 20th century. A lot of times, I will say that people sometimes think of artists as not maybe the brightest individuals. You always hear the joke, well, they can take up basket weaving or something like that. In this case, Robert Motherwell has his doctorate in philosophy from Harvard. And he's written numerous books, and he is a very intelligent man. But his art, on the other hand, is all about the moment. It's about impulsive acts and documenting a moment. And so here he's made this gesture. This is not some kind of character in a language, foreign language or anything like that. This is just a simple gesture that he made at one moment. This is a chine collé, actually. It's where the artist will have printed the background, this red rectangle here. He would have then printed this gesture onto this brown paper. Then he would have taken the two and he would have used probably rabbit skin glue and put it through the press again, and it would literally meld the fibers together. And if you look at it closely, there's just one little lift over here, but it looks like it's all one pure plane. And this is just really wonderful. I was teasing Carl because Carl, Jeff, and I all went to the University of Iowa together. When we were at Iowa, Motherwell premiered a suite of prints that were really monumental. It was called the Open Series, and it was just a simple little three-sided rectangle that was floating on different colors of picture planes. And I kind of thought that Dr. Kottemann thought, that was at the museum at Iowa. I think I could buy something that was equal to that, and so he did, just to remind him. His brother also taught at the University of Iowa, and so they did have a connection there. Another really important American sculptor and artist in general is Alexander Calder. Alexander Calder comes from a family of sculptors, basically, but of artists. His grandfather and his father have done a lot of the monumental Revolutionary War hero memorials that are out on the East Coast. If you go to Philadelphia and you see William Penn on top of City Hall, I believe it is. Isn't it City Hall? His grandfather, I believe, sculpted that one, Sterling Calder. In this case, though, this is a print that Calder did. And it's interesting because Calder was really a gregarious individual. And in high school, he had one of those teachers that said, well, what are you going to do, making everyone, what are you going to do when you grow up, kind of idea. And he was sitting next to his friend, and his friend said, I think I'll be an engineer. And Calder he's like, I never even thought about that. And so he thought, you know what, I'm going to be an engineer too. So he did go to school to study engineering. But once he finished school, he realized this isn't fun. He was used to just making art and having fun. So he took his background, his knowledge in engineering, and he created what we know as the mobile as art. And it was his innate sense and his education that made him realize that if I put a shape that weighs this much on this side, I can counterweight it here and make these incredible installations. And even engineer large sculptures. Nita Sunderland and Alexander Calder shared the Federal Plaza in Chicago for a long time. He had a much larger piece than she did, but she always said, I'd like to think that I shared the plaza with Calder. Calder instead of him allowing her to do it. Again, these pieces, Calder was in his office at, down at the Savings Tower, and it was really incredible. Calder, even when he was doing two-dimensional work, tried to use three-dimensional forms, or these pyramid-like forms, and then use colors so that he would gradually get us to go through the picture plane and give it some depth to it. We see this wonderful Miro, and we also know that they had another piece by an American artist named Sam Francis, and he did a lot of the same things. Just like Motherwell, Miro really liked to do just these impulsive gestures, and so he did, here we have a circle and another circle and this little character that he created. This isn't one of my favorite Miros, but it really, it speaks well of what it is all about. And with Miro and with Picasso and with Braque, I think that we really do see that there are so many important phases of art history that we get to really understand and see how they lived with it. This is a piece by Nita Sunderland. And Nita, as we said, is taught at Bradley University for almost 30 years. She did take a sabbatical and she went to study marble in Italy and went to the same marble quarries that Michelangelo would have gone to. She purchased some marble, and from that purchase she made 3 sculptures. This is one, and what is it titled, Anne? I don't remember. Reclining figure. So I really, honestly, this sounds sexist of me, but I really believe this is a little more feminine than Henry Moore's pieces. I don't know. There's just something about it. It's a little more. It's graceful and it's wonderful and everything. But this is a piece that the Kottemans did select, and it is going to remain here at the museum, which I think is really great. Nita, because of her friendship with the Kottemans, and there was not always the warmest connection between Bradley University and the museum and everything, but Nita has gifted 17 pieces, was it, to, right? Yes, of sculpture, and it really is, it's all because of the Kottemans. The Kottemans brought people together. This exhibit itself really is the result of the Art Guild and the museum being able to jointly show this as a legacy, so to speak, right before it's broken up. So it's really, it's quite wonderful. This piece is by far the second most important piece of art. It happens to be Jeff's and my favorite, and it's growing on Ann Schmidt here, that's for sure. This is by Ellsworth Kelly, and Ellsworth Kelly also helped define American art in the 20th century. He's used to be, when he was in the Army, he was doing actually the camouflage design, and he was learning to do these wonderful, graceful, wonderful shapes to create the camouflage. And he continued to do that all of his life. He would do these wonderful little line gestures of plant life, and just, they were beautiful and graceful. But he didn't have the same angst that maybe Motherwell had. So he didn't care so much about making people react to his work. Instead, he wanted to create something that made them contemplate what he was doing. And his idea was that I am going to create, with color, a way to have people stop in their tracks, literally, and just look at it. And he would look at those shapes that he was just used to drawing. He thought, okay, I can create a shape. A lot of times, he's part of the minimalist movement, which means they use the least amount of materials, and there's hardly, and you can look at the surface of this, there's no paintbrush marks, there's no strokes noted here. This is Red Orange Panel, creative title. He designed the shape of the panel as well as the color. And he would work with putting colors next to each other and combining colors to get tension or not get tension with them. This, again, is just installed perfectly. The idea is that it is supposed to float on the surface. It's supposed to have this wonderful shadow that just really kind of gives it a little bit of a punch to it. Dr. Kottemann and I, when we were at Lakeview Museum, we did a collection an exhibition that was called Peoria Collects, and we would try to find people who had different objects in the community and borrow them to create an exhibit. We did one over at the Peoria Art Guild. It's the last time actually that we did that, and every time that we did it, we always had Anita Sunderland. The Kottemans, no matter what, always included Anita Sunderland. And last time that they did it, we were fortunate to have the Ellsworth Kelly. And I think that it's really remarkable. Now, I will say that when it arrived at the Kottemans' house, Nita happened to be there. And she looked at it, and she looked at them, and she said, well, I know why you bought it. I just don't understand why you bought it. And I think that there's a lot of people that don't understand. This is ironically one of the pieces that the Kottemans purchased that really appreciated a lot. And Dr. Kottemann used to tease Jeff and I and say, and I'm sure he told Kathy and Carl too, but that if anything happened that they would need like extended nursing care or something, you know, the O'Keefe and the Kelly are the two pieces that they could liquidate and could send them. They could have a nice living, a nice life on that, believe me. Let's see, okay, this is going on forever, isn't it? One of the artists that really was one of the Kottemans' favorite artists is George Rickey. It was one of the first public pieces that they placed here in Peoria. It was originally out at the first airport, and it was right off of the observation. The observation deck was here, and the sculpture was down here in a little grassy area, and it was wonderful. What I think that they really admired most about George Rickey is that he worked so hard on designing a way that he could make kinetic or moving sculpture. And the pieces down over at the airport has two rectangular pieces, and it's featured right here, and here's Rickey. Again, the Kottemans invited him over to be here when they installed it and everything. But the arms, the wands are going to keep going. They will never hit each other. Now, I teased Carl because he didn't even remember this, but when we were at Iowa, the School of Art was here, and right next door was the Museum of Art. And there was the little plaza in between the two. And smack dab in the middle of the plaza was a George Rickey. And it would just be sitting there. And I always kind of thought, I bet Dr. Kottemann just loved it because they had Rickeys at their house and they had Rickeys at school. And there's no way Carl was going to get away from George Rickey, no matter whether he's at school or whether he was at home. He was going to appreciate that. They did have two Rickeys in their backyard. And that's the other thing with their backyard. They had wonderful, wonderful pieces. They have one piece that is coming here to the museum. It's by Noguchi. It's a wonderful totem. It's aluminum and has cutout shapes. And it was always in front of their evergreen trees. And this was so Dr. Kottemann also. He'd call Jeff and I every once in a while, and he'd leave. He tried to catch us early in the morning, but we both teach, so we were gone very early. But he'd leave us a message, John and Jeff, the Noguchi fell over again. We got to upright it. So we'd have to go over there and we'd upright it again. And it was mostly these really bad winters that we had. The melting snow would erode under the base, and so it would tip over, and we just have to put it back up. The best part of the story is, though, that the Noguchi is going to remain here at the museum, and I guess they're thinking about installing it very soon, right?
Yes.
Correct?
So
yes, they will? They will?
The contractor was out to look at the site to pour the pad.
That's great. And I believe that Kathy and Carl are both taking a piece. That was always their desire, was that each one of the children would have one. But this is also truly Dr. Kottemann. Here we have George Rickey's obituary that he cut out, and a little drawing of the piece that he has here, and then another picture of them. This is all put together in a very cheap frame. And he had that there. But no matter where the Kottemans were going, if they were anywhere close to, on the East Coast in particular, close to George Rickey, they made an effort to go visit him at his studio. They did that with almost every artist in any time that they were going to, or a gallery that maybe represented an artist that they knew of. They would do that quite often. This corner has two remarkable artists, two most famous artists. Here we have George Braque, and we have Pablo Picasso. And obviously together, those two created Cubism, which made us look at two-dimensional painting like no one else ever had. We saw the front, the back, the sides, all at the same time on a two-dimensional frame. And that's, I think, the strength of this Braque, is that we have that Cubist kind of idea, where he's got plane upon plane upon plane, and we have the bird upon all these, and we don't know if we're looking up at the bird or if we're looking down on it. So he's kind of manipulated us in that fashion. Picasso, on the other hand, here he had been at the Madeira pottery, and this is a wonderful example of what Picasso was all about. He never did sketches per se for like his ceramics or anything. He just was always drawing and everything. He just would take the end of a stick or something, and he drew this man on a horse. He's probably most famous. Some of his prints were the Don Quixote prints, where he had these images of a man on a horse. He did this very quickly. It's a wonderful example. It's not necessarily the most important Picasso or anything, but I think it does describe what Picasso did and how immediate he was and how he could just master doing anything very quickly. This isn't one of the Dale Chihuly's, and this is the most recent Chihuly piece that they own. We've had the good fortune of having Chihuly here in Peoria 3 times. The first time was back in 88 or 89. I can't remember exactly when. The Persians. They were small pieces. They were wonderful little vessels that they had, and then he filled them with his rounded glass globes and everything. I think I told Kathy and Carl this before, and I should get over it, but when we brought Chihuly here to talk, and at the Lakeview Museum we had a wonderful thing called the Book Bazaar, and people could buy books there. And so before the lecture, which was downstairs in the auditorium, Chihuly, we just got back from dinner, and he was looking through the books, and he was pulling out books right and left, and he had a stack of books like this, and then he just gave them to me and said, well, I can't take these on the airplane with me. Here, ship them to me. He never paid for it, and he never paid me for the shipping, and he owes me $40.67. And I should probably get over it, because I don't think I'm going to do it. The next time that we had Chihuly, though, and I guess it was the Strommel collection, right? Strommel collection. He had started to introduce this new form, so to speak. And as I said, artists, a lot of times, they continue to want to explore other cultures and other ideas. And in this case, Chihuly was looking at Native Americans, and especially basketry, and looking at them. And he realized that the wonderful Native American baskets were huge, but they didn't have a foot on them. The 20th century, we were required to put feet on a little, something to stabilize them. So everything was upright, And I know Corey, when he installed the last one, had these wonderful shelves, and all of the vases were very upright, and everything. But as he was studying the history and reading about the Native Americans, their baskets assumed whatever objects they put into it. So if they put a bunch of logs into it, yes, it would sit upright. But if they filled it with grain, such as corn, it was going to slump one way or the other, because it didn't have to be upright. And that's what he thought about this. Why is it that I have to correct everything and make it perfectly upright? So he started to do these wonderful vases, and if they slumped to the right or to the left, that's how he left them. And if you look closely actually at the decoration part, there's a lot of inner winding. It's almost like weaving a basket, and it's really fun. And I think the Kottemann saw this part, because it was one of the first times it had been introduced in an exhibit. And they saw this, and it was nothing that they had seen before. And so, you know what? I think we're going to be interested in getting one of these. So they sought out, they looked around, and they found one. And this is just a wonderful example of his. Another piece that I think they purchased because it was so unique is Richard Becks' spoon. Obviously it's a spoon, right? A very large blue spoon. But this is cast glass. And cast glass, I think, is what brought them to it, because it's very pop art. It's a larger-than-life, simple utensil that we all have in our house. Instead, he's made it very monumental. When they do cast glass. They make a mold, just like they would for a sculpture, a bronze sculpture, and then they would use the glass and pour it in there. The thing is that everything has to cool, it has to anneal, and so it takes much, much longer. I think the best part is especially if you can look from the back, you could see all the imperfections. A lot of times, mostly with glass artists, they want everything to be perfect. There should be no bubbles or anything like that. In this case, you could see the bubbles on the back of it, and it really is, it's just wonderful. And this is the original Kottemann way of stabilizing it. It's kind of falling apart. It's kind of, I think it's sort of funny that this is a wonderful print. It's a Grant Wood print, and Grant Wood obviously is most known for American Gothic. It's that wonderful portrait of his dentist and his sister. And it was an interesting thing because it was entered in a competition at the Art Institute and was awarded first prize, which was $300, and they have the painting. So a pretty good $300 investment for the Art Institute, that's for sure. We had, back in the late 80s, we had an exhibit of Grant Wood's prints at Lakeview Museum. And Dr. and Mrs. Kottemann really were, it was just one of those things where it was just plain beautiful. It really was. It was just, Grant Wood is known as a regionalist artist, so what he's done is he's taken his environment, what he's very familiar with, but he's idealized it. He's created a style that makes it, the hills are always very flowing, the trees are perfectly shaped. This is probably one of the best examples, though, of his style that Grant Wood ever produced. I don't know if this piece is going to one of the children or what. The pieces that we have here are going, some of them are going to Central Florida, some of them are remaining, a few of them are remaining here, and then the family is also taking pieces. Kathy and Carl obviously have pieces that they want, and then their children are also selecting pieces. And it's funny because Kathy did tell me that one time, I think one of her daughters had chosen 2 pieces and she said, oh, why'd you choose those? They're not like the most expensive or anything. And she said, the kid said, well, this one reminds me of Grandma. This one reminds me of Grandpa. And I think that's enough said. That's what it's all about. Let's see, let's go this way over here. And I don't know if, Anne, if you would come over here, because I never, ever, ever explain this.
Stand really
yes,
close to you.
Stand real
so
close to me, because this is magic to me. This piece, which is coming to the museum and is really a significant addition to the decorative arts collection here. But go ahead, Anne, because I think it's magic. You explain.
This is one of the videos that's playing over there with Dante Marioni making the Reticello. And normally a Reticello is a fairly small goblet. So this was made so large and so perfectly is truly remarkable. The artist starts with straws of glass with a white core and a clear outside, lines them up like little pencils on a table on a hot plate, so they're touching, and then puts them in an oven to melt them, so they start to melt together, and then using tools joins them into a cylinder, and then attaches that to a blowpipe, pinches off one end to form a bubble, twists it in one direction. Then when that is ready and all the lines are twisted in one direction, that goes into an oven to stay warm. And then the process is repeated, but this time twisting in the other direction. And the first one is taken out of the oven, put in a holder on the ground, and the second one is lowered into it absolutely perfectly in order to get those lines with a symmetrical diamond shape. And if it's done just perfectly, the white core, which has a little dimensionality to it, those 2 white cores crossing trap a tiny bubble of air in each diamond. Yeah. And you can see each and every one.
There is it is absolutely perfect. I mean, it's magic. I'm sorry, it's magic.
It is magic. The craftsmanship of this in an American doing mastering a Venetian technique is really
and it's
fantastic.
A traditional vase form. I mean, it's just perfect. So that's remaining here, which I think is really
I love
so
this
exciting
piece because it represents a lot of what you see in this exhibit. You have Harvey Littleton and Dominic Labino, who are two of the fathers of American studio glass, where American...
Why don't we move over here? We'll move over to Harvey Littleton and Labino, Dominic Labino.
So they start the American studio glass movement, whereby American artists can use hot glass to express themselves. But it was Lino Tagliapietra, whose piece is on the other side of that wall, who came over from Venice and broke all the rules and taught the Americans the craftsmanship to do it right. And in Dante Marioni, those two traditions are joined.
And I think what's important is Harvey Littleton really did introduce glass as an art media. And he worked closely with Labino here, who is a scientist and one of the most intelligent people I think I've heard. He was an inventor also, and he has 60 patents, glass patents. And between the two of them, they managed to really say, you know what, we can do more with glass than just make goblets or make a bowl or make a plate or something like that. We can introduce it in a way that no one has ever seen it before. And so these are two wonderful pieces that they're... Now, this one is coming to the museum, right? The Chardet or Chardier.
It's
and again,
too.
it's optical glass with reflections, and you can see the architectural, and this will be one that really is quite unique. I think the most important thing that we really learned from the Kottemans is the fact that you have to love what you have. And it really was quite remarkable because a lot of times people buy things just for investment. Nothing against them, but like the Strombo, none of the Chihuly pieces were ever in their home. Each and every one of these pieces was at the Kottemann house, and each and every one of them had a place in their house and had a memory that was attributed to it. I know Mrs. Kottemann, and Carl kind of laughed because he said that really isn't the way it was, but for the newspaper just let us believe that it was. But we did an article years ago when we were doing Peoria Collects, and she was going through the house and she was turning off the lights at the end of the day. And she said, you know, I am the luckiest person. I go to bed every night happy because she's walking past every single piece of art, and every single time it's a memory. It's something that really warms her heart. And she was right. If you can live with your art and you can love your art, then it's really worth it. We think the best thing is that we have had the last 10 weeks, has it been almost? 8 or 10 weeks, that Carl and Kathy have honored their parents by allowing us to take these 45 pieces and create, which I think has been one of the best and most popular exhibits that we've had at the museum in a long time. And that we have had such significant pieces of art here in our community all the time. And they're from people who really wanted to enrich our community. And I think the Kottemans did. And that's what we owe them. It really is an art history lesson. And it couldn't be better.